So before we proceed, I want to hold myself to this. I want this to be the last video that I ever talk about MicroStrategy, at least for a year. I'm going to give myself a year window here. And that doesn't mean I'm not going to talk about, if Saylor buys some, if somebody asks a question in the chat or whatever it may be, but I'm not going to do any more specific discussions or videos on MicroStrategy because I think that people are getting distracted. And I think that we need to be focused on Bitcoin. That's it. Everything else is noise. Saylor is buying as many Bitcoin as he can. That's what he's doing. And I think that everybody should be doing that on their own because he's front running the US government. In January, the US government is going to start buying Bitcoin and start developing their strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I think that everybody listening to this chat today and later should be focused on developing their own Bitcoin strategic reserve for their family. So the other part there too is I think that there's a lot of great work being done by other people on YouTube, and I don't need to be just another guy talking about MicroStrategy. That's why I haven't done too many tutorials, because I think that there's people doing that. And that's why I'm going to stop talking about MicroStrategy too, because I think that there's people who are more knowledgeable. They've spent more time looking into this stuff and they're doing really good work. So this is going to be the last time I talk about MicroStrategy. Because I wrote this blog post today. And so I'm just kind of I have 8 big picture things that I want to talk about in terms of MicroStrategy. And it's not anything technical. It's not about convertible debt. It's not about the NAV premium, the net asset value, anything like that. I'm looking very big picture here. And I'm going to give you some reasons why I think that you should be looking into MicroStrategy yourself for a small portion. So I think that people right now should be focused on buying, earning, and protecting the Bitcoin. Because in a few months from now, you're going to be competing against the US government for Bitcoin. And we've never had an asset like Bitcoin before. There's never been an asset before that's truly scarce, truly fixed supply. Even MicroStrategy. I mean, I said a couple minutes ago, MicroStrategy this time last year, I think had 17 million shares. And I think that they already have more than 220 million shares. I'm pretty sure. Might even be more now. But that's a perfect example of there's no scarcity there. He can issue more shares. They can buy Bitcoin. They can make it worthwhile for the shareholders, but they can still sell more shares, issue more shares, and dilute your shares. So it's not like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the only truly fixed asset, fixed supply. So building your own strategic Bitcoin reserve should be your top priority. Plus, there's 2 big risks involved with MicroStrategy. Two key parts. The fact that Saylor is holding the Bitcoin on your behalf, and the fact that your stockbroker is holding the shares on your behalf. So we don't know what's going to happen. That's completely out of your control. MicroStrategy could lose all the coins. Would it be good for Bitcoiners? Yes. Would it be bad for MicroStrategy holders? Yes. Could the stock market crash? Could things go down? Could there be a cyber attack? Could everything get hacked and you might not have access to those shares anymore? Yes. It's a big risk. Unlikely probably, but still a big risk. So Bitcoin has no counterparty risk. No counterparty risk. And does that mean that I'm selling my MicroStrategy shares? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I see MicroStrategy shares very similar to how I see Bitcoin, except I'm not tied to my MicroStrategy shares like I am with Bitcoin. I'm going to keep my Bitcoin in cold storage, 98% of it for the rest of my life. And I'm probably going to keep about 50% of my MicroStrategy shares for the rest of my life. So I kind of see it in the same way, except I'm not as attached to my MicroStrategy shares. And so I plan on keeping about 50% of the shares forever and using the other half as needed for maybe a yacht or something. So here, without being any sort of technical discussion or any sort of NAV premium debate, I just want to give you 8 reasons why I think you should consider buying a couple shares in MicroStrategy. And it's a perfect day to do it by the looks of it, since it's crashing. So number one, MicroStrategy is shorting the fiat system, a system that was designed to fail. And about 20 years ago, it should have failed. So it's 20 years past its expiry date. MicroStrategy is shorting fiat. That's exactly what he's doing here. Number two, they're using the greatest asset in history, Bitcoin, to short the worst asset in history, fiat. So those two kind of tie together, but I think it's important to know that he's not using real estate here. He's not using other assets. He's using Bitcoin. That's what the whole thing is built on here. Bitcoin, the greatest asset in history. Number three, they already have 330,000 Bitcoin. And since writing that this morning, they have added 55,500 Bitcoin to that stack. So let me say that again. They already have 385,000 Bitcoin. No other entity on earth is going to be able to catch them. I know the US government has these big plans to get 1 million Bitcoin. Good luck. Not only will they'll be the only public company, the only company on earth to have that much Bitcoin. I don't think any countries are going to surpass that. And think about the implications of that. Like, think about if you agree with where Bitcoin's going in terms of the world reserve currency, in terms of repricing every other asset on earth, in terms of the collateralization of the opportunity there, what he's going to be able to do with that, it's insane. So I don't think anybody's going to be able to catch them. And that's going to be the advantage. That's the leverage there, is that nobody's going to get as much Bitcoin as MicroStrategy. Number four, they're front-running nation states right now. They're front-running the U.S. government. The U.S. government has come out and said, with this bill, strategic Bitcoin reserve bill, that within the next 6 months, the U.S. government is going to start printing money to buy Bitcoin. They've told us that. This isn't the conspiracy theory that we think is going to happen. They've come out and said that. And I think it's going to happen much faster than that, because Trump is a businessman. He knows the implications of showing your hand and what happens from that. So he's not going to wait till next June to do this. I think the week he gets into office, he's going to write an executive order to start buying Bitcoin. He's not an idiot. And an idiot would let this play out for another 6 months and let everybody else, Saylor, China, Russia, the BRICS nations, all front run the US. So it doesn't make any sense. And if there's one guy I think who would understand that more than anybody else, I think it's Trump. So that's definitely not priced into anything yet. I think a lot of people are like, oh, the US might do this. No. They're going to be doing this. So it's not priced in yet. It's not priced into Bitcoin. It's not priced into MicroStrategy, but they are front-running nation states. Number five here is that most people, including your financial advisor, have no idea what's going on here in Bitcoin or MicroStrategy. And that's where the opportunity lies. The fact that in order to understand what's happening here with MicroStrategy, you have to have a basic understanding of about 20, 30, 40 different layers of the markets, of Bitcoin, of history, of money, of convertible debt, everything, the macro. There's just so much involved here, and there's hardly anybody who knows what's going on here. So that's where the opportunity is. That means that most people who will own MicroStrategy are not here yet. Number six, they will be added to the QQQ index and likely the S&P 500 sometime in the near future. So it might happen this week, where they take a snapshot and that's who's in the new QQQ index. It might happen next year. But we know what Bitcoin's going to do between then and now. And the MicroStrategy share is going to rise with that. So one way or the other, I think that they'll be added to these indexes. They'll be added to S&P. And when that happens, that's going to create massive and passive demand for the MicroStrategy shares. And keep in mind that the people who are going to be buying that, the people making up that demand, are very long-term holders. They're not going to be trading it back and forth. They're not going to be selling it when it goes up 20%. They're going to buy it and hold on to it for a very long time. So that's massive. That hasn't happened yet. It's coming. And that's not worked into the, I mean, it could be worked in a little bit to the price right now, but for the most part, I don't think that it is. Number 7, you can hold these shares in a tax-sheltered account. Your capital can ride the Bitcoin wave without having to worry about paying any sort of tax on the gains. So here in Canada, that's a TFSA. In the US, it's like a health spending account or something. I don't know. Daniel mentioned it a little while ago. I don't know what it is, but there's ways to hold MicroStrategy shares in a tax-sheltered account. Massive. And that's why that's something that you should look into selling. It's different than Bitcoin where you buy, you hold it forever. MicroStrategy, if this is accruing in a tax-free account, that's what you want to be using for your life, to fund your life. And number 8, and this is the main one that I want to focus on today, because over the weekend, I had a ton of people. I shared a few clips talking about MicroStrategy, and I had a ton of people who were ripping me. Just like for no reason. They're like attacking me because I said 2 things. I said that in the future, Saylor could possibly look into selling some Bitcoin when the supply is so low and he only has to sell like 5 Bitcoin to buy a whole bunch of shares back. I think that's a no-brainer. It would benefit the shareholders. It would benefit the company. It'd be a very minimal amount of Bitcoin that they would actually have to sell. And people were like, 1,000 people came out of the woodworks and said, Saylor has said he's never going to sell any Bitcoin ever. They're never going to sell any Bitcoin. And I'm thinking like, okay, that's what, I mean, it's a good catchphrase. And he might. I don't know. You don't know. We can go on the fact that he said he's never going to sell. But I think that if there comes a time in the future where there's like 100 Bitcoin floating around every day that are up for sale, think about the value of those Bitcoin. And if he could sell 1, 2, 5 of those Bitcoin and buy back a bunch of shares to increase the benefit and the value to his shareholders, to me, that's a no-brainer. And I know it's easy. I don't think he'll ever sell 99.9% of the Bitcoin. But for things like that, where it makes sense for the shareholders and for the company, I don't think he's going to rule it out. So don't pretend like you know the future a decade out because you've been studying MicroStrategy for a fucking month. And just think about like the big picture here, because this game hasn't even started yet. He's just in the accumulation phase right now. He hasn't announced any plans. I mean, he's hinted at it, but like what he's going to be doing in 10 years from now is way, way different than what he's doing today. And people do not see that. They think they look at the price today, they look what he said last week. But if you look what he's been saying for the last couple of years in terms of the vision of MicroStrategy, so that's what number 8 here is. This is only the beginning. They have much bigger plans for MicroStrategy. They will utilize Bitcoin and Lightning in their current operations. They will either start or acquire a bank and deal in Bitcoin. They will offer fixed income bonds on their Bitcoin. They will start or acquire insurance companies who currently hold 0 Bitcoin. There is no limit to what this amount of collateral can do. No limit. So I think that Saylor will continue taking on debt as he's been doing, as long as the spread, as long as the premium stays high there, as long as it makes sense for people who are giving Saylor money, as long as that makes sense, and as long as the demand stays high. But eventually, I think that the big money, the people who are buying his bonds right now, I think that at some point in the future, they're going to actually be able to buy Bitcoin and hold it themselves, which makes a lot more sense. Do they have that ability today? No. That's why this is so enticing to those companies, to those entities, because they can't do that today. But in the future, they're going to be able to. They're going to have a whole department dedicated to buying Bitcoin and protecting their Bitcoin. Why would they trust it with somebody else when they have the capital, they have the infrastructure in place to hold their own Bitcoin? So what Saylor's doing right now, there's not always going to be a demand for that. This isn't going to be like a 20-year thing where he just keeps taking money and buying Bitcoin. That doesn't make any fucking sense. It's working today because he has the demand for it. He's not always going to have that demand. But what he is going to have at the end of this is an incredible amount of collateral, more than anybody else on the planet. And when you start putting that to work, people are like, oh, you're not going to buy any businesses. You're just going to keep taking on money and buying Bitcoin. I'm like, no, this is like a 3-year plan for MicroStrategy. After that, that's when the fun starts. With banks, with insurance companies, with any business, any operation that's earning money, he converts that into Bitcoin. The convertible debt option isn't always going to be around for him, but he's going to have enough Bitcoin where he can issue fixed bonds on the Bitcoin that he doesn't have to deal with this stuff anymore. It's going to be a much different buyer of those bonds. And it eventually will dry up. So that's why it's not a Ponzi. That's why it's not a pyramid. He's basically just using his resources to buy as much Bitcoin as possible and use that in the future as his collateral. That's how he's going to fund this whole thing. Right? So the rules will change, the demand will decrease, but by this time, MicroStrategy will be the #1 company on the planet. And once they get to that #1 spot, they're never going to move from there. So you have the ability today, with this foresight, with this vision, you know what's coming here. There are risks, obviously, but that's why I said just get a couple shares and hold on to them for a very long time, because those 2 shares that you buy today are probably going to be 20 shares in a year from now after another stock split. And then you hold on to those for another couple of years, and all of a sudden you have 200 shares in MicroStrategy. And so the issuance of shares is going to keep going up. It's not really an issue, though, if they're a stock split, but you know what I mean. The outstanding and diluted shares will continue to go up. The Bitcoin will continue to go up, but you have to understand what's happening here. All right. So when that happens, that's when Saylor shifts gears and starts putting the collateral to work to earn even more Bitcoin. And nobody understands how truly scarce this Bitcoin is. That's why I say when, in 10 years from now, when there's hardly any Bitcoin, not like there are today, you have to think further out here. But let's say there's 10 Bitcoin available for sale each day. That's how much this has dried up. That's how many times it's moved into these long-term holders that hasn't moved for 10 years. So there's 10 Bitcoin a day for sale. Think about what the value of those Bitcoin are going to be worth. Think about what the value of MicroStrategy is going to be worth at that time. And so again, there's a lot of people who shit on me for saying this, but he could at that time just sell 1 or 2 Bitcoin, buy back a bunch of shares, and that's a very big benefit to the shareholders. And I mean, if you're talking 1 or 2 Bitcoin, somebody said that I suggested he sells 10% of his Bitcoin. Never fucking said that at all. Not even close to that. But you sell 1 or 2 Bitcoin, buy some shares back without even putting a dent in your stack. By that time, you'll probably have 500,000 Bitcoin, maybe more. So that's kind of what I was getting at there. But you just have to think differently. You have to think about where this is going, not what it looks like today. That's the main thing that I wanted to get across today. And so the 2 morals of the story here. Never sell your Bitcoin. Never sell your Bitcoin. And the second one is that if you do have some capital in a retirement fund, move it into MicroStrategy. They are going to be the fastest horse. They are going to be the vehicle that provides Bitcoin to flow where it should, it gives the ability for it to flow all around the world as a global currency to the people who have the most capital to be spending on it. So there will absolutely be a movie made about this in the future. The Big Short, which we've all seen, Michael Burry made $80 million off of that, or $800 million off of that gamble, shorting the U.S. real estate market. And Saylor's already up, 10 billion, 20 billion? And this thing hasn't even started yet. So Saylor's going to be the first trillionaire. You do have the ability today. You're lucky enough to be born during this time in history, and you can attach your car to that MicroStrategy rocket, jump on, and buckle up.